Brothers and sisters, let me regress just for a moment, just because this is a moment that I can point to something. Something that was done yesterday that helps me with today, right? And then I'll move on. It won't take but a second. You know, yesterday we talked about the need for legislation for retraining and putting another law in the books. But the people who have come to this meeting should feel as though you have been in an educational process. I mean, don't you feel that way? I mean, I do. I feel like I've learned a lot, you know? And I said to one of the presiding elders today, you know, they were talking about y'all because we have continuing educational opportunities. They're called district conferences and Sunday school conventions. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing there, they're talking about y'all, not me. Because that's what those are. Well, that's what they're for. They are for continuing education. Yeah, so y'all, thank you for letting me do that. I did not want to have our facilitator to just come out and start saying her stuff, though she's very capable of doing that. This part of the midwinter meeting is supposed to continue ringing the bell for an alert. There is a fire, and if we don't get up and be advised to the dangers of the fire, it will consume us. Turn on CNN, turn on MSNBC, turn on Fox News, read any newspaper of quality. In fact, go to the grocery stores, talk to your neighbors who may not share the same views as you do in North Carolina. There is a fire burning all over this country, all over this world. If we're not careful and are not aware of the need to get up and do something, we will be consumed. There was an announcement today that I was made aware of a person running and announcing that they are running now for a certain position in a certain state in the 2nd Episcopal District. I'll let you figure that out yourself. There is a fire burning. We need to be alerted to the danger of a fire. Thus, we have invited persons amidst us who are very capable, who are very tied in, who are firemen, who are alertists, who manage to keep us on our toes and aware of the many dangers and many others. But because we have this opportunity, we have the privilege of inviting others to not only participate on this panel, but lead this panel. I have taken this personal privilege of allowing one who knows the facilitator just to take 60 seconds and present our facilitator, seeking to help him with bonuses at home. If he says the right things, he could find great favor. Won't you receive our candidate for the chairman of the Episcopal Committee, the Reverend William Lamar IV, as he presents one whom he casually knows, our facilitator today.
Good afternoon, 2nd Episcopal District. The one that I am presenting to you this afternoon is the daughter of Thomas, Joe, and Zola. She is a native of Tallulah, Louisiana. She's a graduate of Grambling University and Howard University. She is sweeter than a plate of yams with extra syrup. She is prettier than a Jamaican sunset. She has the intellectual gifts only to be compared with Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston. And I know that there are grace and mercy because she said yes when I asked. The one facilitating today is the Dean of the Graduate School at Howard University. She is the former president of the Toni Morrison Society. And she is the incoming president of the largest guild amongst scholars of English and rhetoric, the Modern Language Association. Would you put your hands together for the one who really lifts me, the one I do not deserve, but I thank God for, my wife, Dr. Dana Adrian Lewis.
Thank you, sir. You did well. Thank you, Bishop. And good afternoon to the Second Episcopal District. We are just delighted to be here with you today. And I want you also to, in addition to joining me in welcoming our panelists for today, but to join me in thanking our bishop who saw it fit to make some very deliberate time to help us to think about the implications. The lie of the separation of church and state is just that. If we aren't clear that white evangelicalism is incredibly political, then we're naive, which means we have to be aware of what's going on and make decisions and be educated. And bringing together the folks who can help us to do that is something that the bishop saw fit to do today. And in a situation where everyone wants time on this agenda for him to say this is specific time to educate congregations, lay people, ministers, clergy, everyone, so that we can do the work that's necessary, so that we can be liberated and liberate everyone along with us, is something that deserves applause. Thank you, Bishop Davis. Similarly, we want to thank people who have taken the time out of their schedule. So my mentor is retired, and essentially what she has helped me to see is that there is no such thing. So in spite of the fact that these gentlemen are retired from very honorable positions, I can assure you that they have calendars and schedules that are incredibly busy, and they did not think it robbery to share some time with us today. You have the full introductions in some instances if you use the QR code or in your books, so I'll be very brief with the introduction so we can get right into this conversation. We'll start with some opening remarks, and then I have some questions that I will share among our group here, and we'll have conversation about local politics, about national politics, continuing and extending the conversation that Attorney Eiffel began during the lunch hour, and then we'll open the floor for some questions here. And because I am 50, I must put on my readers. I have LASIK, and I still have to put on my readers, but as I hope you agree, they're kind of fly. $25 peepers, you too. Our first panelist is retired Congressman George K. Butterfield, who is a native of Wilson, North Carolina. He's the son of Dr. G. K. Butterfield, who practiced dentistry in Wilson for 50 years and was the first Black elected official in Eastern North Carolina. His mother was a classroom teacher for more than 40 years. As we're making decisions about what to share and what not to share, it's really important to think about where people come from and how they end up in this space, so that we're all also clear for the young people in the space that you too can grow up to be something that you haven't necessarily seen a direct example for. During his law practice, Attorney Butterfield was widely known as co-counsel in various successful voting rights cases. In 1988, following the restructuring of the method of electing Superior Court judges, Congressman Butterfield was elected as resident Superior Court judge, and in that capacity, he presided over civil and criminal court in 46 counties in North Carolina, developing a reputation as a firm and fair trial judge. In short, he's home. While serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressman Butterfield was a senior member of the powerful Committee on Energy and Commerce and was the chairman of the Subcommittee of Elections. In 2014, Congressman Butterfield was unanimously elected chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. One of his achievements was the creation of the CBC Tech 2020 that resulted in many Fortune 500 companies becoming more diverse in their board and C-suite appointments. Congressman Butterfield is married to Dr. Sylvia Butterfield, who serves as Deputy Assistant Director for the National Science Foundation's Directorate for STEM Education. He's also a proud father of 3 successful daughters and 4 grandsons. Please welcome Congressman Butterfield. I'll do a second intro, and then you can have opening remarks if you will. I'll do our second intro, very brief, and then see, we're working together already. The Honorable Paul L. Jones of Greensboro began his career as a staff attorney and assistant clerk of the Supreme Court of the United States. From there, his career spanned military service, legal services of North Carolina, private practice, district court judge, and lastly, Superior Court Judge and Senior Resident Superior Court Judge. He retired from the bench after 26 years of service, and he currently serves the profession and the community by commitments as chair of the Board of Management of the Hayes Taylor YMCA in Greensboro, president of the Greensboro Rotary, and president of the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers. So I told you he's not really retired. Please welcome the Honorable Paul L. Jones.
Well, I have the microphone working, so I think we're in business. Good afternoon. Let me first thank you, Dean Williams, for those very kind and generous words of introduction. You read it accurately and you got right to the point. A lot of the details you left out, and that's something that I really, really appreciate. One of the worst things that one of the things that I really dislike is to go places like this and get introduced, and someone goes on the internet and pulls down 2 or 3 pages of my bio, and they can sit there and read every word of it. And just thank you for paraphrasing my bio, and I'm grateful for that. To your bishop, your presiding prelate, Bishop Davis, thank you, sir. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for your willingness to include me in this phenomenal program today. When we had the conversation a few weeks ago about me coming, I did not have the full appreciation for the multitude of people who would be here today. I knew you would have good attendance, but I did not realize it would be this massive. So I'm a little nervous. How about that? But we are going to make this work. As the dean said a moment ago, I am a lifelong resident of North Carolina. I grew up in a small town called Wilson, North Carolina, which is in the eastern part of our state. I hear some calls. I went to college and law school in Durham, North Carolina Central University. Hello! And after finishing law school, I went back to my hometown, as did Judge Paul Jones, who went back to his hometown in Kinston. We established a law practice that was community-based, and we stayed there in the law practice for many years, and later on in life, we were elected to the Superior Court bench. I was elected to Wilson, he was elected over in Kinston. I served on the Superior Court bench for 15 long years. That was a very important assignment, because I presided over the board in many counties throughout North Carolina, and I saw the best of times and the worst of times. But it was a sobering experience. Then in 2004, there was a vacancy in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I offered myself as a candidate in that election in 2004, and was overwhelmingly elected in July of 2004. The next day, I was sworn into the United States House of Representatives. It was what we call a special election, which means that it's in the middle of the term. Anytime there's a special election, the Speaker of the House wants you to go to work the next day, because there's 700,000 people who are unrepresented in the House. And so I went to Washington and served 18 long years in the U.S. House. Part of that was as chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and it's my honor to lead more than 40 African-American members in Congress, what we refer to as the Congressional Black Caucus. But I retired. I retired about a year ago, and news reporters ask me quite often, why did I retire? Why was it necessary? And I give them a very simple answer. I said, first of all, I'm 75 years old. Hello. And it was was time to do something else. But secondly, and I guess most importantly, I'm very dissatisfied with this function in Congress. And I like to speak truth to power. And I didn't like biting my tongue, concealing my feelings about the way the institution was operating. And so I felt it might be time just to step aside. And the third reason was that the Republicans redrew the district. And even though I probably could have won re-election, probably have cost $4 million more to mount a successful campaign, I just didn't have the appetite. And so about a year ago, I stepped aside. I did not run for re-election. Judge Congressman Don Davis is now the congressman for the first district. And so I left Congress and now I'm associated with a law firm in downtown D.C. and I'm continuing to interact with my former colleagues. Yesterday morning, I was the keynote speaker at the Democratic retreat of the Democratic Congress members. All 212 of them were out in Greensboro, Virginia yesterday morning. And I was the keynote speaker yesterday and had to get out of the room because the President of the United States was on the way to come in and to do his speech. So I had to get out of town very quickly. But it's good to, I could have stayed, but when the President comes, they lock down the whole place. You can't move. And I didn't want to get caught in that situation. So it's good to be here with you. My father wasn't in Bishop. I didn't tell you that. My father was an immigrant from Bermuda. He grew up in Allen Head Church in St. George's, Bermuda. Immigrated to the U.S. in 1917. Couldn't find a job, and so volunteered for World War I. Got out of the war in 1919, I guess it was, and made his way to Raleigh. Became a student at Shaw University. They didn't want to let him in because he didn't have a high school diploma. But since he fought in the war, they gave him an opportunity to enroll in the college program. And he did that. Graduated from college, went over to Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, became a dentist, came back to my community where he practiced for many years. But while he was at Shaw, he met my mother. My mother, for those of you who don't know, back in the day, they did not have high school for African Americans. When you hit the 6th grade, you went to work. You went to the farm or you went north. You went to work. But if your family had some connection, and my granddaddy was a Baptist preacher, and he had a relationship with Shaw University, and he sent his children over to Shaw to get a high school education. And so it was there that my parents met on the campus of Shaw, and Mom finished high school, came back and taught school in the Roosevelt schools for many years. So that is my life story. When Dad came to North Carolina, my mom's daddy, as I said, was a Baptist preacher. So he ceased being an AME and became a missionary Baptist. And that's where he stayed until the day that he died. Let me just talk very, very briefly about what's going on in Washington. You know, and I know, what's going on in Washington. It's not good. We have a divided Congress, we have a divided country. And this election, in November of this year, statistically could go in either direction. Regrettably. That's where we are right now. Just 9 months, the American people tell us who they want to lead our country. Tell us whether it's going to be, yes, him, or whether it's going to be Joe Biden. But my brothers and sisters, the difference between these two men is as far as the East is from the West. And yes, we must pause to consider what a second Trump term would mean for our country and for the world, and the tremendous responsibility that is on our shoulders to make sure that we get it right. Trump's character, his temperament render him absolutely unfit to be president. I'm not going to turn this into a political rally today, and I tell my colleagues when I teach them how to speak at churches that you're going to a worship church, you're not going to a political rally. Just give them a few facts and sit down. And so that's what I want to do today. I want to give you a few facts and sit down. But this man's views and his policy decisions literally threaten our democracy. He has no respect for the Constitution, no respect for the rule of law. You know, when Trump won in 2016, White, and I thank you for mentioning White Evangelical a moment ago, white evangelical Protestants constituted 1 out of 5 in the electorate, 20% of the electorate. But guess what? 77% of them supported Donald Trump. That show of strength enabled Trump to be elected and enabled him to appoint 3 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. And so as we prepare for this election, it's not enough for us to talk about Trump's character and what, yes, that's important, or his temperament and his conduct, but we must also talk about the successes of the Biden administration and congressional Democrats. I'll just give you the top line. The pandemic, the American Rescue Plan was passed, and it worked. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill that invested over $1 trillion in repairing the nation's roads and bridges and provided broadband to rural America. President Biden has appointed more black women to the federal courts than all presidents combined. That includes Barack Obama has appointed more black women as judges than all presidents in history combined. The Inflation Reduction Act kept insulin prices at $35 a month. 4 out of 5 people can now find a plan for $10 or less per month. Student loan debts. I know many of you may not have student loan debts, but you sure have children and grandchildren, and your nieces and nephews who have student loan debt. President Biden, and I want you to etch this in your memory, President Biden has forgiven $137 billion of student loan debt for 4 million students. Democrats passed the first gun safety legislation in 30 years. And under President Biden's leadership, minority unemployment, African American unemployment, reached its lowest point, and more than 14 million new jobs have been generated. And I want to talk about the extraordinary appropriations that we gave to HBCUs. I'm going to ask Judge Jones in just a minute, if he will, to speak to funding HBCUs. As a trustee here at A&T State University, and unprecedented amounts of money have been appropriated for that purpose. Let me close by talking about one of my favorite subjects. I did this for Barack Obama, I did it for Hillary, I did it for Joe Biden. I went around the country talking to churches. I went to Bethel and Philadelphia and gave this same presentation. I want to talk about the Johnson Amendment. You know what that means? In 1954, Lyndon Johnson was in the United States Senate. He had just won his election a few years earlier by 51 votes in Texas. It was time for him to come up for re-election again. The faith community, the churches in Texas who were evangelical, wanted to get rid of Lyndon Johnson. So he introduced an amendment in the Senate that would prohibit 501c3 organizations, churches, from engaging in partisan political activity. And it passed. What does that mean? Over the years, many of our pastors, and perhaps some of you, have been led to believe that there is a separation between church and state that prohibits churches from being involved in any way with a politician or a political campaign. That, my brothers and sisters, is not true. And I want to dispel that rumor. I've tried for the last 15 years to do it. I want to dispel that rumor with you today. You, your church, you as a pastor are not prohibited from engaging in political activity. The only thing the law prohibits is for your church to endorse or oppose a candidate, or for you from the pulpit to endorse or oppose a political candidate from the pulpit. But outside of the four walls of the church, you have every right to do anything and everything you think is in the best interest of your government. And I encourage you to do it. Candidates coming to your church, and this is my last point, and I can answer some questions. Candidates are always knocking on your door, wanting to come to your church. Let me tell you what I tell the politicians back in Washington, especially the white politicians. Let me tell you what I told them 2 mornings ago. You're welcome to come to African American churches. You must understand the authority of the pastor. Number one, you must understand the importance of time. You must understand how political you should or should not become during your presentation to the church. The first thing they need to do, and I'll tell you what I told them, first thing you need to do is PTP. When I used to go around speaking, I would always put that in top of she'd say PTP. You know what that means? Praise the pastor. If they deserve it. I tell them that all the time. You've got to spend a minute authenticating and recognizing the authority of the pastor. The second thing you need to do, politicians, is to authenticate yourself. Let them know who you are, what you've been doing for the last 30 years. You know, tell them a little bit about your family, when you go to church, what your core beliefs are. And then the third point, you can then talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, all these other things that I just talked about a minute ago. And guess what? When 3 or 4 minutes come, you need to start wrapping it up. And if that pastor stands up, you sit yourself down. I thought you'd get a chuckle out of that, but that is what I tell these guys. But there are two ways a politician can come to church. One is in a candidate capacity. That means if he or she is running for office, and if you allow that person an opportunity to speak, the law says you've got to give their opponent the right to speak in the church. Do you have to go out and find the opponent? No. So if you let this candidate speak and you get a call next week from the opponent and say, hey, you let my opponent in, can I come in? You cannot say no. But the burden is on them to call you and ask you. An elected official can come to you in their non-candidate capacity, which means they can come in and talk about their work, what they're doing, what they're not doing, what their vision is for legislation. They can do that. They should get political, but they should talk about their work because it's important to your members, it's important to your community. And so I've got a lot more that I can say, but I'm going to stop right there. I told you 10 minutes. I think I've gone 12. But thank you so very much.
Good evening. I thought I was coming here to have lunch with my classmate, G.K. Butterfield. We've been knowing each other for over 50 years. We entered law school together in 1971. Come May, we will have graduated from law school 50 years. So we've been at this a long time. GK sent me a text and said, I'm coming to town to speak at the AME conference. Why don't you have lunch? I thought that was my role. But since I'm here, if the bishop asks you to have a seat and say a word, Bishop, I've learned to be faithful and I've learned to be obedient, at least as a judge, that I can do that. I looked out in the audience and saw Tina McNair. Tina was a court reporter in my district. So, hey Tina. You know, when I look out in the audience, I said, God, if I didn't know better, I think I was still in court. Because when you look out and you're looking for justice, sometimes you think it's just us. So, no, we're not in court today. I told the bishop, I said, well, Bishop, I attended the AME Zion Church, St. Augustus AME Zion Church in Kinston before I moved. He said, well, we'll forgive you. So I said, thank you, Bishop. But there's nothing like the church, because I realized how I got my start in my profession by referring clients to me. When I got elected, I'd have never got elected as a Superior Court judge or a District Court judge without the church. So whether you're talking about a position from the outhouse to the courthouse, you have to go through the church, particularly the black churches. And you know, it's always funny, but some politicians always want to show up to church, but they only show up every 4 years. Don't put nothing in place. Someone may pull out $5. Well, $5 don't get you nothing most places. As trustee board chairman, I used to tell people who come to church, well, you know, you can't even buy 2 rolls of toilet tissue for $5. And that's just a fact. But we as a church have to stay connected and stay involved because our future and the future of our children is at stake. There's so much at stake. You know, it would break my heart when I would go to court and look out, and I said, I must be in the wrong room. They said, no, Judge, this is it. And all these young people who've gone astray, those same young people that I didn't see in church on Sunday. You have youth Sundays and youth church, and then you had to go and find somebody, youth, to take those roles. Because you can't get your children to come to church with you unless you beat them to death. Your grandchildren, they don't want to go. And every time you look up, they got a phone or iPad in their hand. And they on Facebook, they on every other kind of book except the church book. So we need to pray for these children and bring them to church. Let me tell you a little story. I was at a trial. This was about 20 years ago in Greensboro, man charged with kidnapping and everything, and he had the biggest Bible in the world. He said that the Lord is going to save me. The jury came back, found him guilty. I said, anything you want to say? And he said, the hell with the Lord. So his heart wasn't right in the first place. He was in the wrong place, looking for salvation that he didn't earn, he didn't deserve. Now, these people who we have duly elected, such as President Biden, had to hold them accountable. Now, I'm on the board of trustees at A&T, and I saw a lady in the back who gave me the equal sign. Well, I went to law school at Central too, so I ain't mad with you. They have given a tremendous amount of money to North Carolina Central because most kids who go to these historically black schools, first generation, first one to go to college. Now, just because you go to college, it doesn't mean you have to try to buy the college. You know, I see kids riding around in cars that put behind the shame. And I say to myself, how can you drive a BMW if you ain't college? And they say something, well, I use my Pale brand. Well, that Pale brand wasn't meant for you to buy a BMW. Or to play in fraternity, or a sorority. That's like what it's for. And then you wonder why you get out of college owing $80,000. That's like buying a BMW on a 20-year plane. It makes no sense. And as people say, well, let me just tell you, grandma had more sense than you did, and they do. Because you can't, as my mama said, you can't beat common sense. Book sense is fine, but common sense is king. And we know there's common sense in the church. But the Biden administration and the present administration have made many ways where college is affordable. And if your child has a chance to go to college, encourage them to go. I see kids who say, when I turn 16, I'm gonna drop out. Now, what sense does that make? I've never seen somebody say that I want the least qualified person for this job. They want the best qualified person. The more education, the better. Opportunity is when you prepare and opportunity comes. But if you're not prepared, if opportunity comes, it means nothing. So encourage our younger people. Glad to have you in Greensboro. Glad to see my classmate again, GK. GK, that was an expensive lunch. I didn't know I was had to talk for having lunch. But it's all good. Welcome to Greensboro, and hope you enjoy your conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, I appreciate that. So one of the questions that we want to talk about has to do with some of the key issues for the 2024 election. And you have begun to talk about some of them, especially in relation to some of the advances that we see in this particular administration. You talked a little bit about Supreme Court, but what would you say are some of the key issues that we should be thinking about nationally, and then statewide and locally? As you all heard in the conversation that we had over lunch, we need to think about that local level conversation as well, and voting at the local level. And how do we incentivize people to vote down ballot in addition to that national election?
Our voting rights are under assault. Let me tell you what I mean by that. That is not just rhetoric, that's fact. After the Civil War, after slavery came to an end, Congress gave former slaves citizenship. The argument was then that they may be citizens, but they don't have the right to vote. So in 1870, Congress came back and passed the 15th Amendment, adding the right to vote to the Constitution. So starting in 1870, 1872, African American men became registered voters. Women didn't vote during those days, black and white. Men became registered voters, and they did great things. Oh, they elected 20 African Americans to Congress. Senator Hiram Reynolds from Mississippi, AME preacher, the first African American to serve in the United States Congress. I don't know if you knew that. Google it, check it out. And so that was the period of Reconstruction. African Americans did great work. Churches were built. HBCUs were built. Howard University, 1865. Sure, 1865, I know. It's all right, it's all right. But that was a glorious period. But in 1898, 99, right after the Wilmington Race Riot, 1900, the North Carolina legislature, you're from the South, your state legislature too, passed a law called the literacy test. The literacy test said that in order to vote, you've got to be able to read, you've got to be able to write, you've got to be able to satisfy the registrar that you're literate. African Americans were kicked off the voter registration rolls. When they came back to register, they couldn't do it. And so for the next 65 years, the African American community was politically impotent. Could not influence anything politically. But in 1965, after the March on Washington in 63, and after the Civil Rights Bill in 1964, Congress then took up a Voting Rights Act. When Martin Luther King came back from Oslo, Norway in November of 64, Lyndon Johnson called him to the White House to thank him for his work on civil rights. That's when Dr. King said, President, yes, we have civil rights, but now we need voting rights. And because of the audacity of Martin Luther King Jr., because of Selma to Montgomery bond, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act has transformed North Carolina, has transformed Virginia, has transformed most of our southern states. Why? What do I mean? First of all, the law says that you cannot have a literacy test. It's off the books. That's good. The law says that if you are from a southern state and you have a history of discrimination, then you cannot change your laws without the approval of the Justice Department. It's good. It also has a Section 2 which says that if you don't like the way your system is constructed, political system, if it discriminates against your community, then you can bring a lawsuit in federal court. You can challenge it. And if you can prove that the black vote is being diluted, we will order a single-member district system, whereby you will have some black districts, you will have some white districts. So the Voting Rights Act has been transformed. Well, the right-wing Republicans can't stand it. Every step of the way they've tried, some way, somehow, to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. In 2013, they succeeded. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court, at the urging of right-wing Republicans, found that the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act could not be enforced. And I don't have time to develop that. Just trust me on that. They disabled the Section 5 provision of pre-clearance, which means states can pretty much do what they want to do. The Section 2 provision, which means that you can bring a lawsuit, we thought that was alive and well until a few days ago, when a circuit court in this country ruled that private individuals and civil rights groups cannot bring voting rights cases in federal court. Only the Department of Justice can bring a voting rights case in federal court, which is going to really cripple voting rights efforts. And that case is now working its way to the Supreme Court. And when they rule, I fear that they will rule that the Republicans were right, which means the Voting Rights Act would be dead. What that translates into is that North Carolina, right now, we had a 3-10 delegation, 3 Democrats, 10 Republicans. But because of the Voting Rights Act, we sued, and we won. And the court ordered a 7-7 plan. 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. And it worked. We now have 7-7. But in the meantime, we've lost control of North Carolina Supreme Court. Republicans now in charge of that. Trump has got 3 people on the U.S. Supreme Court, lost control of that. So any litigation that concerns redistricting will not be favorable to us. And so in this next election, it appears that we're going to lose 3 Democratic congressmen in North Carolina. But the good news is that we will pick up 3 in New York. We'll pick up 1 in Alabama, your home state. We'll pick up 1 in Louisiana. We'll pick up a few more around the country. And just possibly, we might have a Democratic House of Representatives in the next Congress, and Hakeem Jeffries will be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Thank you.
That provides for us a good segue to a moment where I want us to be just a little bit interactive, very briefly. So, how many of you have had conversations with either family, friends, or people in your congregations about voting in 2024, just by show of hands? Excellent. So we know we're having these conversations, and if you were not able to raise your hand, we just ask you to consider having conversations with people about voting. The second part of the question, how many of those people that you have talked to said they were not going to vote? You have had a conversation where one person said, I'm not going to vote. I work on a college campus, and I can tell you, young people are saying, why bother? And not because they don't understand voting and its significance and voting rights and the Voting Rights Act, but because for whatever reason they seem indignant and unable to stomach what they're saying is the lesser of 2 evils. Like, we all held our noses at different points in elections, let's be clear. But the folks are now saying far less frequently that they're willing to do it. So one of the things I want us also to think about is the messaging. Like, how do we communicate messages to people who are saying that they want to vote? So those of you who said you know at least one person who said they were not going to vote, part of our commitment has to be to have conversations with them. But what I want to ask you all to do is to help us understand how to have those conversations in ways that are not offensive, where we are building trust with the people that we're having conversation. We are not judging them. We are not essentially looking down on them, but making the case in a way that they can hear. So that last part of the kind of interactive moment here is, how many of you know how to turn a person who says, I'm not going to vote? Even if you haven't tried, if you think, I can convince somebody who said, I'm not going to vote. Can you convince somebody to vote just by show of hands? The numbers keep getting smaller. So part of what we want to do in this next moment, just for the next 5 minutes or so, is to have a real serious conversation about what it looks like to talk to people who aren't willing to vote. We don't have to tell them who to vote for. Certainly some of the things that you say to them should make it a little bit clearer who better candidates are, right? You don't have to say definitively, but how do you make the turn? What does the messaging look like where you have built the trust? Because we know that that's important. People do not change their minds if they don't trust who is communicating with them. People don't change their mind if you don't respect them, and it's clear to them that you don't respect them. And be clear, they know by the end of the first sentence whether or not you respect them or not. And then you have to have a compelling case. What does that look like? What does that sound like? How do you make that turn?
Let me just say this. I've talked to students over at A&T and Bennett about voting. And one of the responses I got from students was what President Biden said he was going to forgive my student loans, and because he didn't forgive my student loans, I'm not going to go vote the next time. Well, that's probably the worst excuse in the world, because one thing for sure, if Donald Trump is elected, he's not going to do anything about your student debt and probably going to try to kick you under the bus besides not helping you in your student loans. There's so much at stake here, it cannot be a single issue as a reason why you don't vote. And the thing you have to convince people is, if you don't vote, then you voted for the opponent. And one of the things that people are dependent on is that we will not vote. And that's the reason we see so many disparaging ads and comments, and it's gonna get worse, about Joe Biden. I was looking at something today, they was talking about his memory, or he was an elderly man. Well, all of us are elderly. I'll be 76 next month, so I think I probably qualify as elderly because I always ask for the senior citizen discount. But we must convince the younger people that their whole future is at stake, and it's important that they go vote. The elderly need to vote because there's a Republican message that we have to cut back on Social Security because it's gonna go broke. Everything is at stake. That's why it's more important for us. When you see a young 18-year-old or 20-year-old who has a child with a child tax credit and all these other things which they have benefited from, this will be lost. There are people who will lose food stamps. Everything is at stake. Their Obama phone, the internet. There are people who, they don't care anything about us except when it's time to vote. You know, they put all kind of obstacles in front of us, such as in North Carolina, they established voter ID. Well, I have a driver's license, but they have tried to convince people, oh, that's not good enough, or if you don't have your birth certificate. You don't have to bring everything in the kitchen sink, you just have to bring one thing, and they will even provide you an ID card if you don't have one. There is no excuse. There's too much blood on the floor for us to not vote.
My response is this. This is going to disappoint you, but we got to do something about it. 19% black males heard Trump as their president. I can't explain it. I can't explain it for the life of me. Polling data suggests that almost 1 out of 5 African American males want that person to be president. 1 out of 5 black males prefers a Republican congressperson to a Democratic congressperson. We're working on that. We're working on how to deal with that. Give you another statistic. 30 years ago, only 5% of the American people said they were not religious, that they were not spiritual. Today, 43% say that they are not spiritual or connected with a faith. That's a problem. So there's another demographic that we're dealing with called the nuns, not like Catholic nuns, but nuns. These are people who are not affiliated. Some of them say that they are spiritual, but they choose not to be affiliated. And so while we deal with African American males, we have to also deal with those who are not churched. And we've got to go at it from the identify. 18 to 35-year-olds, you're right, Dean, you're right, Judge. 18 to 35-year-olds, that's a pretty tough demographic right now. We've got to deal with them one-on-one. We've got to explain to them the consequences of voting the wrong way or not voting at all, because the consequences are down. You're going to begin to see in the next few days massive campaigns of misinformation and disinformation. It's going to be all over your television all the way through November. They're going to be telling lies. You know, my mother used to let me say the word lie. It was a fear, remember? And if y'all remember that. And so I don't use the word lie very often. But my children use the word lie. but they're going to be telling lies on television and radio and in print in the weeks and months to come. And we can't believe that stuff. They're going to say you elect Democrats, they're going to do away with Social Security. It's a lie. They're going to do away with Medicare. It's a lie. They're going to let 1 billion immigrants across the border every day. It's a lie. So we've got to prepare for misinformation, disinformation, and tell these young people they've got to be strong, they've got to stay with the community. Thank you.
Now, I appreciate that response for it. Yes, you can applaud. I appreciate that response for so many reasons, and I think interestingly enough, they're tied together, even as you might not have intended to. As we think about the polling, I'm curious whether or not the folks doing the polling are asking the right questions and asking the right people. So the article in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago that really did have the conversation about black males preferring Trump. Every black male that I talked to didn't identify with any of the males that they talked to. So how do you find that demographic? So one of the things that we need to figure out how to mobilize around, both in churches and beyond, is what that polling looks like so that we get a different kind of number. If you poll the people in this room, and this is a pretty decent demographic. Now granted, it is a church demographic, but we're all coming from different places. So there isn't this kind of monotheism around sound, but I'm curious whether or not in this space, people would have that. And I don't think it's all because folks in here are associating a particular kind of politic with the gospel. That's important, and I think that that's something that we have to be very brave about. I think we pull back a little bit from social services as a gospel act, as the work that Jesus did, and as the work that we are obliged to do. Making sure that everybody gets to eat is something that Jesus did. This ain't Democratic or Republican, this is I am voting the gospel. How do we convince people and have that message coming out of our congregations that our responsibility for people who believe in the gospel is to do this particular kind of thing? So when we think a little bit also about strategies, again, if we're thinking strategies, how do we move people, mobilize people to think about those key issues? We want to raise just a couple of issues that the same polls that we're talking about suggest are the top 15, if you will, and I'll rattle them off quickly. But it would seem to be the case that even if people don't agree about immigration, because there is that conflict and that challenge with immigration, because to be clear, Republican strategists are fairly intelligent. And Bill and I laugh all the time as we're driving down DC, he's like, the Heritage Foundation, the lights never go off. They are clear about their objective. Are we clear that if you position something like immigration, and you leave people in Chicago, and you make that sanctuary city be in a black neighborhood, how quickly can you get black people to turn against brown people? And we have to figure out ways not to do that. So immigration might not be the issue for people, or might be, but here are the 15 top issues. And then we'll take maybe, Bishop, how much time we have? We have time for 1, 2 questions or no?
There's another issue that one of our sisters wants to ask.
Okay.
In connection to certain law.
Okay. That we'll take up as our first one after we take a look at the list, because what we want to be able to do is to help give language to talk to people. Artificial intelligence, whether or not, nobody's talking about this on the ballot. AI is not going to be something you got to vote for or against, but the people that you vote for around AI are going to make a difference. So thinking about what AI means. I do some work around medical humanities as well. The New England Journal of Medicine published a study a couple of days ago, or a week and a half ago, that said doctors are going to begin to have their notes automated. Because we know that takes up a significant amount of the doctor's time. And of course, the insurance companies want them to see 25 patients a day instead of 12. Now, how you see that many patients a day? Every time you see your doctor's like, hey, how you doing? Good, bye. So, they'll automate it. The automation with mental health said, with a white client, the patient was released to the care of family members. The automation for black patients said, the patient was released back to prison. That's artificial intelligence, reading data sets. And the data set says every time we have a patient, or the majority of people that we see with a patient with mental health, the response is prison. This is where they're going for it. Now, it's nuanced. It's nuanced in a number of ways because we all know Black people don't check each other into mental institutions. So there is no data set that says, I took my mama, my brother, my sister, my cousin, and I have them released back to me. We might keep that person upstairs until they calm down. We're not checking them into a mental institution. But someone has to interpret. AI can't do that work. So AI is on the ballot. And I promise I won't do this with the other 14. Budget. Your local budget, your state budget, the national budget will be on the ballot. Crime, education, energy, climate, healthcare, housing, immigration, international affairs, Gaza, or any international war and the war industrial complex, essentially. Mental health, where we've seen tremendous increases post-COVID. Pensions, as we've mentioned. Gun violence, poverty, taxes, workforce. There is something in this list for every person who says, I'm not voting. So giving them the language to say, well, this isn't just about abortion. This isn't just about voting rights. This isn't just about, well, there is something that people care about. So take some time to educate yourselves and our congregations to say, what are the things that might compel people to go out and vote? So we'll open the floor now for the local question, and then I think we have room or time for probably one more. She was taking notes, to her credit. Focused, yes. And I'll give you my mic since I'm sure it's going to be Congressman Butterfield who responds, not me.
Thank you, Bishop Davis, and I want to first of all thank our distinguished guests and our elders and everyone by the sound of my voice. The question that I have is, can you hear me now? Okay, great. The question that I have is, it's an issue that's going on in Johnston County, and I brought it to the bishop's attention. It's an issue that concerns me because it deals with the inmate that is on death row, and he's going to receive the death penalty. But because of the Racial Justice Act, that they're going to try to have another case, maybe to commute the death penalty for this individual. And not only with that case, it would change the trajectory of other people that's on death row. Right now in the state of North Carolina, we are the 5th largest state of people on death row. We have 136 individuals. Out of that 136 individuals, 60% are Black and brown, and that is a concern. Out of that, not only that, there was 12 people that was exonerated. Out of those 12 that was exonerated, 11 of them were Black and brown. So we know that there's a problem in our justice system. So what can we do about that? Right now, I have a box of what we call postcards. And these postcards is going to be sent to our governor. And if you decide to fill out a postcard, we want to make sure that you put your name, your legal government name, your complete address, and your zip code, and a statement why you think the death penalty should be commuted. Because I don't know about you, but I tell people every day, when I wake up, I'm brown. It doesn't matter how many degrees I have. It doesn't matter that I work for the state of North Carolina. It doesn't matter where I live at, but I'm still a Black person. My nephew came home from the military in December, and he's stationed in Germany. And I had to remind him, if you get stopped, remember, you're still an African American. Nobody's gonna ask you, are you serving for your country? So we must make sure that we can do what we can do to protect ourselves. And no one should have the right to die. You know, my mother even said, she said, well, if they committed the crime, then they deserve to die. I said, no, no, no. Because we know that a lot of us are innocent. And we have died innocent. And you cannot bring a life back. Only one person can give and take life. And that's our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
When I was a Superior Court judge, I presided over many capital cases. Some resulted in life imprisonment, others resulted in the death penalty. It is the jury that recommends the death penalty. The only thing the judge does is to verbally announce the death penalty. And so over my 15 years on the bench, I have verbally announced 5 death penalties. None of them have been executed. I thank God for that. North Carolina has strayed away from capital punishment, but it's still on the books. It's still on the books. We still have an enormous amount of men and women who are on death row. And so the North Carolina legislature must repeal the death sentence and substitute life imprisonment as an alternative. Now, I cannot speak for or for the governor, even though he's a dear, dear friend. But I don't believe a single person will be put to death in this state under this administration. The next administration, the Republican candidate is likely to be a man named Mark Robinson, who is an African American, who, and I know some black Republicans across the country, there'd be some people, not this person. He would totally embarrass you and disgust you if he came into this room. I cannot speak for Mark Robinson. I don't know what he would do if he were to become governor. Judge, you were on the bench longer after I left. What's the state of affairs with the death penalty?
Well, the death penalty is still in effect. It's on the books, but a lot of district attorneys have now taken a position that they will not seek the death penalty in their respective counties. And this is more so a progressive movement that we're trying to get away from the death penalty. 2 weeks ago, in my capacity as president of the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers, I wrote a letter to the governor asking him to commute all death sentences which are now in effect to life imprisonment. That we're not talking about whether they're innocent or guilty, but just in your capacity, and the governor does have that capacity to commute those sentences. I wrote the letter, I emailed it to him, I mailed it to him, it didn't come back because I sent it certified. His 2 assistants replied, "Thank you, Judge Jones." So I know he had the letter. It's sitting on his desk along with about 20 other letters from faith groups and other groups who've asked him the same thing. Now, what we do as in the criminal justice system, it's a dirty business because during my 20 plus years on the bench, I've handled over 200 murder cases. And I remember being in Clinton, a person killed 4 people because they owed him $20 for drugs. And he got life. So it depends on the particular district attorney who has the discretion to decide, one, whether or not it's going to be a capital case or a non-capital case. And some district attorneys, that's what they ran on. I'm tough on crime, and I'm going to give them the gas chamber, everybody they found guilty. But it's barbaric. It doesn't accomplish anything in impose the death penalty. It depends more on your zip code than anything else, because I remember in Lumberton, Robertson County, the district attorney, if it was a murder case, he would always seek the death penalty, Robertson Bridge, as a matter of fact. And you would have 20, 30 people a year. He was scared the devil out of you. People plead guilty probably they were innocent because they didn't want to face the death penalty. I mean, that's onerous. When I see some places that people kill 3, 4, 5 people, they say, well, I'll plead guilty to 2nd-degree murder if you won't seek the death penalty. Now, what kind of justice is that people can bargain away the death penalty depending on where you live? It's an unfair system. It needs to be abolished, and the governor should commute those sentences.
Thank you. It's even within criminal justice, there are layers of things that would be relevant to different people. We have one question here, and then we'll wrap.
Thank you gentlemen for what you're doing. I am the chair of Ward 1 Democrats in Washington, D.C., which encompasses Howard and the U Street corridor. We are dealing with a major issue in D.C. that will have an exponential impact on America. Tell me what you think about ranked choice voting, which New York used, and it's going to happen across the country. What impact will that have on our community? We see it not good. We voted it down in DC last week at our Democratic meeting, but it happened in New York. Ranked choice voting. Oh, ranked choice voting is a level of voting that if the first person doesn't win, they go to the second person to see what their numbers are, and then they add the numbers up. So the person who has the most may not win the election according to the number of where the ranking falls, which means that majority doesn't always win, will not win in this process. And it's having a major impact across the country. What do you think?
And also a ranked choice, so basically you pick your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and the purpose of it's supposed to be for efficiency, that way you don't have runoffs, because basically you've already picked the second choice. GK, you?
I'm not an expert on that, except I know the supervisor groups are.
Just for accommodation purposes, can you use your microphone, please? Thank you. My teacher voice.
I'm not an expert on this
Subject. I'm not an expert on the subject, but I defer to the civil rights group. Like Cheryl Ann, who was here a few minutes ago, all of them are opposed to ranked voting. I'm opposed to ranked voting.
So what we want to encourage you all to do and to invite you to do is to make sure that you and your congregations all have election plans. They really do matter, and they really do work to make sure that you're clear, that everyone in your household is clear about how to vote, that they have identified whether or not one piece of identification is needed, what is exactly needed. But talk to congregations, talk to friends, talk to people to make sure that everyone has an election plan, and use reliable sources. If you aren't clear about reliable sources to refer your congregations to, please make sure that you are in touch with someone who can give you a reliable source of information to think through things, because there are layers that we want to make sure we aren't strategically outmaneuvered around. Join me please in thanking our panelists.
While they're going, just put your hands together again and just think of the whole pause long enough to be a part of us. And I know that there are some things that just happen because they're the right things, and the Spirit never leads you wrong. I could not imagine anyone else handling the process of being the facilitator with more class, more dignity, more style than the benevolent wife of Dr. Brother William Lamar. Put your hands together for Dr. David. Your presentation of her should have won you some favor, because I had Miss Benjamin recording the line. I'm gonna use it. I can't wait till I get home on the next occasion I have to talk about how sweet a relative, sweeter than a plate of yams with extra syrup. And just think if he had said that on his knees. You know how we do when a preacher's preached a good sermon, we all write it down and we preach our home way the next Sunday when we were pastoring. You just watch. All the brothers in this room was laughing now. All these brothers are going to use that line when they get back home. And so ladies, don't spoil it for them. Let Reverend Hayward and the rest of them use that line. But Miss Hayward is not in the room right now. Where is Hayward? Miss Hayward, are you here? Reverend Hayward, are you here? Reverend Thea? Good, you can use it. She does not know that you got it from somebody else. All right. Now you want to talk.